Okay, welcome to it. It is the Cruise Show. Jeff Garcia is here with boxing legend and announcer that deserves so many accolades that I don't think we could cover them all in this interview. But Jim Lampley, thank you for joining us. I truly appreciate it. It is an honor. Like, it really is an honor.
Thank you very much. It's my privilege to be here with you.
You know, with a voice like yours, when you were younger and you finally hit puberty and that voice kicked in, did you know that announcing was your calling?
It was the last thing in the world I thought. And seriously, and I think this probably happens to all of us, the first time I heard my voice recorded or, in some form of broadcast communications, my first thought was, wait a minute, is that actually what I sound like? Because that's so much less and so much more unimpressive than I thought would be the case. Literally, I was driving a car right here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It was shortly after I had first begun doing things for WCHL Radio, 1360 AM, the central station of the University of North Carolina football and basketball radio networks. I had done a post-game interview with Bill Dooley, the first football game of the season. I heard a playback on the radio while I was driving the car, and my first instinct was, who's that? Because I knew that the content was mine, but I was so certain that that voice could not have been mine at all. So the answer is no. I was shocked ultimately to be successful, and I hope that establishes that clarity and diction and being able to say the words in the right way actually does have some meaning and impact in our business.
It does. And you're the best at it. And that's a great story, because I think all of us, I've been doing radio for almost 30 years already. And I think it took me 5 or 6, 7 years to get used to hearing myself too. You kind of, it's that shock at first, and you try to get used to it, and then you develop yourself as a broadcaster. But man, you're just the best at it. We're here to talk about the Rumble in Riyadh, though. We got to make sure we talk about that. Anthony Joshua, Francis Ngannou, two beasts, two knockout artists from different sports. How do you, as a broadcaster, prepare for that? Have you seen Francis's fights before in the UFC? I know you've seen Anthony Joshua's, but how do you kind of prepare for this?
Well, I saw the Fury fight. So that's my basic introduction. I had relatively lengthy interviews with both of them within the past few days, and that's meaningful in terms of preparation. Obviously, you get hold of as much reading material as you can get and refresh your memory about all the things I've learned with regard to Joshua in the past and in Ngannou's amazing narrative, which is ultimately going to be a narrative movie project. There's no way that it isn't.
Of course.
Sand mines? Who ever heard of sand mines? So at the end of the day, you take advantage of the opportunities that exist for me, because ppv.com is now an established entity with business relationships. After 31 years of calling fights on HBO, I'm still at least moderately recognizable to the boxing establishment. So I get the access to do the interviews, and that's really the central focus of my research. You can read and read and read all you want, but unless you speak to the two fighters face to face, you don't have the real depth of knowledge and awareness that you need to go into this. For instance, I asked Joshua, is it a fight which doesn't seem to operate in his favor, or is it a boxing match which would seem to operate in his favor? And he said, there's no way that I can make sure it's a boxing match all the way against this kind of guy. He's just too big, too physical, too strong. I know he wants to close the gap and fight. At some point, it's going to be a fight. And I wish I could prevent that, but there's no way that I can possibly do that. I'm going to have to be ready to fight. And I think that's the right insight for him to have, and sets up an interesting confrontation in the ring.
Once again, Rumble in Riyadh on ppv.com. Anthony Joshua, Francis Ngannou. We had Francis on the show, and his hands, Jim, are so huge. Like, have you ever shaken somebody's hand and they swallow your hand?
Yes.
Like,
yeah, I've had that experience, and I did not shake his hand, but I certainly had the sense that he was that kind of big. And he also
Yeah.
seems like a big person. In our
Yeah.
interview, he was generous and he was warm and outgoing. And, you know, he said the kind of thing to me that broadcasters like you frequently say to me, complimentary, laudatory, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, that made me feel good about him and made me want him to do well, both in the interview and in the event.
Yeah, yeah, great guy, gentle giant for sure. You know, these crossover fights, we're seeing them more and more and more often. Do you enjoy seeing them just as a fan of sport in general and boxing and fight?
Well, I enjoy seeing them just because at this point they are helping to sustain and continue broadening the audience for boxing.
Of course.
And that's a challenge given that boxing long ago, within the economic spectrum surrounding the sport, made the choice that a smaller, more discerning audience, which will pay a fee to see the fight, is a better way to sustain the business over the long haul than to continue the broad audience approach of, you know, day-to-day network television. For my youth, when I was growing up, I watched Gillette Friday Night Fights, a
Oh yeah.
standard commercial television broadcast seeking to get the largest possible audience for the event. And then within my lifetime, within my youth, really, we began to go in the opposite direction. And I remember sort of being discomfited by Ali Frazier one, by the recognition that now this is going to be a different economic model going forward. And it's not about the biggest audience possible. What will that ultimately do to the sport? Well, as Larry Merchant said, boxing can't fix it, can't kill it. The sport is still around. I still have things to talk about. But, you know, will we see Ali Frazier one again with a global audience that deeply engaged? No, probably not. The closest we get to that is things like this, where
Yeah.
the MMA audience gets to marry
Yep.
with the boxing audience to get together in a larger audience for one big event.
No, that's so true. And we're seeing it as well with the announcement this morning of Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. You know, that's the social media world with the boxing legend. And all of a sudden, you know, that audience can tap, you know, can be as big as some of those fights that you mentioned earlier worldwide. Your thoughts on that real quick? I know we're talking about Rumble in Riyadh, but I have to ask you about your
Showbiz,
thoughts.
you know, it's showbiz, and the key word in showbiz is biz.
Yep.
And you know, Mike is 50 years old. I imagine that he can still get himself into serviceable shape. I don't imagine that there's any particular danger in it for him. Maybe there's more danger for Jake, given how hard Mike can hit and how limited Jake's range of experience is. But at the end of the day, it's not a real competitive sports event, in my view. It's showbiz. And again, money talks. That's the way that that
Yeah, for sure. Rumble in Riyadh, Anthony Joshua, Francis Ngannou, payperview.com, ppv.com. It is tomorrow, our time, 10 a.m. here on the West Coast. So it's a perfect opportunity, you know, sit back on a Friday, maybe take the day off, enjoy a few beverages, and watch a great, great, great fight. Jim, as a boxing fan, is there a fight you'd love to see made?
a fight I would love to see made in the boxing world. Well, yeah, I think there are several of them, and generally speaking, they involve skilled fighters in the middle level weight classes. But obviously, I think it would be best for the global boxing audience and the heavyweight audience if Joshua can make some kind of effective statement against Ngannou, help to put the specter of his two losses to Usyk out of people's minds. Fury gets past Usyk and reestablishes his brand to the degree that it's been in any way diminished or tarnished by his experience against Ngannou, and we finally see Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury. I'm
That'd
not
be amazing.
British, but my heritage is British, and I understand why that fight has for a long time been a holy grail in Great Britain, and they are two very meaningful heavyweight champion identity fighters. So I'm hoping that I'm going to see Joshua Fury sometime in the next few years before they're both old news, because they're getting there.
Yeah, that's true. You know, one thing I really, when I was preparing for the interview, I love that you went back to UNC and, taught broadcasting and communications. Why was that important to you?
Well, because my whole career is an accident. Everything about my career is accidental in nature. My career began when I was a graduate school student here in 1974, finishing a master's degree program in radio, television, and motion pictures. And I was chosen out of a 432-person field in a talent hunt to become one of the first two people ever to stand on the sidelines of college football with a camera and a microphone. That was like, it was like having lightning strike you. And I realized eventually this is the beginning of something that could really become a legitimate long-term sports broadcasting career. And it happened, to use my call of George Foreman over Mike Tyson, which is
Yeah.
the title of my autobiography, now being written for a New York publisher. It happened. And because it happened, and because it would never have happened if I had not had the experiences I had here as both an undergraduate and a graduate school teacher or student, I wanted to come back and teach. And the chancellor was born on my birthday. The chancellor and I are born on April 8th, and he invited me to come back. And he said, Jim, if you want to come stand in a classroom and talk about your amazing life and your experiences, we'll call that a course. And I said, no, not good enough. I want to create and invent something that will stay in the academic catalog, and somebody else will teach it after I'm finished. So that happened too. I created a course called Evolution of Storytelling in American Electronic News Media. I was qualified to do that because for several years in Los Angeles, I was a nightly news anchor, and I had news contracts with both of the major television networks I mostly worked for. So I had the credentials to talk about how evolution of changes in electronics, business, personnel, et cetera, have altered the way news stories are told. And I had seniors and graduate students in my class, and I taught it for 5 semesters, and it was an amazing but frustrating experience. And eventually I stopped doing that to go back to the well, taking care of other business, such as writing the autobiography. So that was what brought me back to Chapel Hill. Tickets to the basketball games will keep me here for quite a long time. And I think everybody, who's ever been to college at any level understands the thrill of coming back to be a teacher in the same place.
Absolutely. And giving back is very admirable. When is the book going to be out?
Well, the deadline that the publisher has established for me to complete the writing is September 24. So if I get the book done on time by September 24, in theory, it would enter the marketplace sometime in April of 25. So sometime by the middle of next year, you will probably have the chance to walk into a bookstore somewhere and buy It Happened, the story of Jim Lampley.
I love the title. Rumble in Riyadh, Anthony Joshua, Francis Ngannou, ppv.com tomorrow, 10 a.m. right here on the West Coast. Safe to say that college basketball's your favorite sport outside of boxing?
It's my pastime outside of boxing, yes. Yeah. And the Dean Smith radio show was one of the first things I ever did.
That's so cool.
Beginning back in 1972 and 73. So that was the beginning platform. When ABC Sports went out to look for somebody to stand on the sidelines of college football with a camera and a microphone, they told the public that they would find somebody who had zero broadcasting experience, who was a totally fresh face, who was the face and voice of the American college student. At the end of the day, they lied. And they wound up choosing me partially because I had been in front of a microphone and a camera before, and they understood that they weren't just taking a complete blind chance on somebody who hadn't done it. So yes, I'm full circle, totally full circle. I don't do anything in broadcasting relative to the basketball team, but I'm a guest on some of the shows. People are still interested in my opinion, and tomorrow is beat Duke Day again for the millionth
Yes.
time.
Yes. Big day for you guys, man. Anthony Joshua, Francis Ngannou, ppv.com, March 8th, 10 a.m. here on the West Coast, Rumble in Riyadh. Jim,
Let's make clear to the audience,
yes.
You won't hear my voice. I participate along with Kevin Ioli in live chat, which means that we are delivering our views of the fight via text into the computer, into your computer, and you can kick back at us. The audience gets to participate in the chat stream. So this is, just as I taught about in my graduate school course, a new form of communication, a new medium which is emerging in the boxing world.
And as a boxing fan, the treat to be able to chat with you is amazing. I think that's, to pick your brain on the fight as you kind of comment. You're right. I mean, that's the greatest thing. I mean, people can sometimes.
You're going to see it in all sports. I mean, what the Manning brothers do is a version of exactly what I'll be doing during boxing match tomorrow.
And a lot of people frown on that. Oh, I like the old way. I like this, that, but technology is creating so many new opportunities to interact directly with people that we admire, people we've watched our whole lives, like you.
For good and for bad.
Such a blessing,
For good and for bad. Am I a supporter of social media? It doesn't matter. They're here and they're going to stay around,
right.
regardless of whether I like the effect. So I have to learn how to live in that world.
All right, I'm gonna leave you with this. Your GOAT UNC Tar Heel basketball player of all time, the greatest of all time, to you, your personal opinion.
So Michael Jordan clearly ultimately became the greatest Carolina player ever, and did stay for 3 years and had a huge impact on the program. My personal favorite, who gave me the most thrills and kickback because of his presence as a person and his modesty and his accomplishments, that would be James Worthy. James Worthy is a great lifelong friend. I will always appreciate his modest demeanor and the friendly way he has always interacted with fans and media. And no slap against Michael. His greatness is incomparable. But if you're asking me, Jim Lampley, who was my personal favorite, my friendship with James prompts me to have to say him.
Great answer. Yeah, he's my favorite as well, as a Laker fan out here in LA as well. Rumble in Riyadh, Anthony Joshua, Francis Ngannou. Again, tomorrow, March 8th, 10 a.m. right here on the West Coast, ppv.com. Jim, truly an honor. Thank you so much. And I really just appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you so much. I appreciate yours.
Yo, check out more of our YouTube interviews now, ASAP+. Download the free iHeartRadio app so you can check out the Cruise Show podcast.